So today is going to be a slightly newer topic, not new, been around for a long time. So, okay. So suppose we have a drug or a treatment for a condition, and we say blood pressure medicine improves mortality. It improves mortality by reducing systolic blood pressure. So that's the mechanism we understand. But that is, other than reducing the blood pressure, we may not know anything. But the blood pressure reduction may be mediated by some mechanism. There may be some other hidden mechanism which we don't understand. So, exploring whether there's some hidden mechanism by which blood pressure reduction causes mortality reduction. So, one of the examples Mercy is going to use. So, reducing systolic blood pressure improves mortality. But when you reduce blood pressure, even the diastolic blood pressure goes down. That may in fact increase mortality. So what's the effect of this overall reduction of blood pressure? How much effect is through the systolic? How much is the problem of diastolic? So this is called mediation analysis. How much is mediated through diastolic blood pressure? It's better first think about the concept. Okay, what is it that I'm trying to look at? I know that in a randomized control study, good blood pressure control improves mortality. Here I want to explore whether reducing the diastolic blood pressure inadvertently may actually increase or may make people fall down frequently and the frequent falls may increase. So these are called mediation analysis. How much is the effect of other things on the whole overall story? I'm just telling in a very brief way. Mercy is going to go slowly. It will be a little long session, maybe 1.5 hours. About this, first we talk what is mediation analysis, then some examples. Then there's a paper which we distribute. We can distribute that paper to everybody. There's one for you can share. Two can use one. Till people come. And then so that you know that okay, this is an article which does mediation analysis. They do a good job in doing mediation. It's a new topic for us. So Mercy will go slow, and then we'll try to answer the question. Over, Mercy.
Good morning. Welcome to another session of CEO. Today I'll be looking at AGReMa tool for critical appraisal of studies using mediation analysis. So I'll first discuss about what is mediation analysis. Introduction to certain concepts of mediation analysis. I will use a sprint trial as an example. Justification to the new need for a newer guideline and how did they come up with this AGReMa tool. Key aspects of randomized control trial that had used mediation analysis. And finally, I'll appraise the mediation part of this theoretical, of this RCT that was done. So part one, you can stop, and because it's going to be long, you can stop in between for questions. So what is mediation analysis? So it is a statistical method which is used to understand the mechanisms by which an independent variable influences the dependent variable through a mediator variable. So in the example that sir had quoted, the dependent variable would be mortality and the independent variable would be your blood pressure. So the mediators there would be systolic and diastolic if you have to split it. It helps to gain a deeper understanding of the causal chain of events. So at least the first part of the talk is from this paper, which is an introduction to the mediation analysis of RCT. And this is the other paper, practical challenges in the mediation analysis, the guide how to use this essentially. So why do we need to do it? Like, what is the added benefit from doing the RCT? So generally we do RCTs for efficacy, to look for efficacy and effectiveness of a health intervention. But for those that are expected to have their effects and outcome through a causal mechanism, mediation analysis can be used to partition the total effect of the intervention. So this partition, so I want you to remember these two words because they keep coming over and over. So the first important thing is the natural indirect effect, the effect of an intervention on an outcome that operates through a selected mediator. I found it very difficult to wrap my head around the fact that natural indirect effect, although that is although it is the focus of our interest, It is called the indirect effect because everything else is direct. This is your assumption, and which is why it is the indirect effect. And it is a main point. The second thing is natural direct effect, the effect of the intervention on outcome that does not operate through selected mediator. So everything else is the direct effect. So well-conducted mediation analysis can guide the optimization and implementation of health interventions. So for the example here, so this is the intervention or exposure. I mean, this can also be used for observation studies, but for now, we're going to talk only about RCTs. So this is the intervention and this is the outcome. This is direct path and this is the indirect path. So all our interest is in F, it is the indirect path because this is the direct one. Okay, so this is showing the direct effect paths not through M and indirect which is through the mediator. So we look at some concepts of mediation analysis and I will use a sprint trial. The sprint trial was published in 2015, which was looking at the effect of intensive blood pressure monitoring on cardiovascular outcomes. So first definition is what is the action theory. So if and also I wanted to keep that temporal association between the intervention or the exposure and the mediator and the outcome in mind. So a theory that supports the hypothesis relationship between the first two, which is the intervention or exposure and the given mediator. That is the action theory. The conceptual theory is a theory that supports the last two, which is the hypothesized relationship between the mediator and the outcome. A collider is a variable that is caused by the intervention or exposure and the mediator. First two or the second two. Okay. It is caused by any of these. A confounder is a variable that causes the intervention or this we know. That causes the intervention, exposure and mediator. The intervention or exposure and outcome or mediator and outcome. So it's it's A, B, AC or AC essentially. What is the control direct effect? The exposure's effect on the outcome. If a given mediator is fixed at a constant level uniformly across the entire study population. Disjunctive case criterion is a criterion that recommends adjusting for all the covariates that are causes of the exposure, outcome or both. When the underlying causal structure is not known, this is very important. We'll see why. Some more. So next is what is a mediator? A variable that may be affected by an exposure and may in turn affect an outcome. A moderator is a variable that alters the direction or magnitude of the effect of an exposure on the outcome. I will use some more examples to explain this. The total effect, the entire effect of the exposure on the outcome that encompasses both the direct and indirect effect. Natural indirect and natural direct we had already looked at. So last one is a path-specific effect. And the effect captures how much of the exposure's effect on a given outcome is mediated through the intermediate variables, along one or multiple of these pathways. Unmeasured confounders we looked at. So now I had told 4 important things in the, of those 10 things, 4 most important things I thought we should all know. We should be familiar with it essentially. The first thing is mediation through M. That's the point of our interest. So mediator is the only type of third variable that lies in the causal paths. So A will affect M and M will affect Y. So if I were to give an example for this, if I were to look at SCS and cardiovascular status, how does the SCS affect the cardiovascular status? The mediator can be diet because higher the SCS, you may end up eating a lot of junk food and then it can affect the cardiovascular. So it is through this. The second one is moderation by Z. So a moderator, like I've said, is a variable that alters the effect of the exposure of the outcome, resulting in effect heterogeneity. So if I were to look at a medication that has the effect of blood pressure on men and women, the sex can be moderator. So in men, so now sex is affecting the estimate of how much the antihypertensives are reducing the blood pressure. The third thing is confounding bias, which we're familiar with. It's basically a common cause for both the exposure and the outcome. For this example, let's take Alzheimer's disease and mortality, and the confounding will be age. As the age increases, your mortality increases and your Alzheimer's also increases. And the last one is collider bias if you are adjusting for C. If you remember, I said this is caused by, that's the word I underlined there. A collider variable is one that has two variables causally leading to it. It is a common outcome of two variables. Like for example, if you look at education at 25 years of age, one thing will be a socioeconomic status and also a high school performance. Both of them together influence what your education 25 years of age will be. So this is just another way of explaining this. So the confounders for the intervention and mediator is these two pink color and the outcome. So in fact, the confounder can affect the intervention, mediator or outcome, while the collider is caused by any of these three things. So for the next part of it, I will use this trial to explain each of these. To explain each of these terms and how statistically they make a difference. So this is an randomized trial of intensive versus standard blood pressure control, published in 2015. So the picot is adults age 50 years or older, hypertension and increased cardiovascular risk, but no diabetes. They have systolic BP between 130 and 180 and at least one of the cardiovascular risk factors. CKD, beta risk factor more than 15%. The intervention was intensive treatment of blood pressure to a target of less than 120. The comparison was up to 140. The outcome was a composite outcome of MI, ACS, stroke, heart failure, and the time median follow-up was 3.26 years. So just a quick overview of what the study looks like because I'll be using this for the examples. So they had about 15,000 patients for eligibility and they had randomized about 9361 patients. And yeah, so each arm had about 4678 and 4683 patients. So I just put the primary outcome there. The primary outcome is a compound outcome, composite outcome. So if you look at this, it is 5.2% in the intensive treatment and 0.8% in the standard outcome. There is not very significant. This is just a numerator of that. So this is the overview of the sprint trial. So now, sir had actually mentioned what the hypothesis testing that we were going to do. The primary hypothesized mechanism for the antihypertensive therapy was that it would reduce the systolic blood pressure and therefore reduce the cardiovascular mortality. But there was also a concern that with this intensive blood pressure monitoring, your diastolic blood pressure can come down and that may increase the cardiovascular risk. So we had set out to see if that actually is true or not. So, like I said, so this for the next 15 slides, I'll use the same picture. So the first one is intensive versus standard antihypertensive therapy. I think intensive is less than 120 and standard is 140. The mediator here is the diastolic blood pressure and the cardiovascular event is the outcome. So this is the causal diagram depicting the effects in the mediation analysis. So what I initially showed you was the full primary outcome and this is the part of that. So just keep looking at these lines. The intervention mediator effect is represented by the solid arrow. So which is this. Each of these are important in their own way, where we'll go through it. And the mediator outcome effect is represented by a solid arrow M21. So this is the second line. The next will be confounders of the mediators and the cardiovascular events. So that is C. Next thing is the dotted arrow. So the dotted arrow is from A via the mediator to the outcome. So it represents the indirect effect. Dashed arrow, which is this, represents the direct effect. And this is the total effect, which is actually what we've gotten from the primary analysis. So now what is the total effect? So the average difference in the outcome between the individuals allocated to the intervention versus the control groups. If we were to extrapolate it to this study, how does it work? The effect of intensive therapy versus standard on cardiovascular events, which is the primary study. Next is the intervention mediator effect. So the average difference in the mediator between the intervention, between the individuals if they were allotted to the control group or the intervention group. So how to do that? The effect of intensive therapy versus the standard therapy on the digestive intervention.
That is like 3.14.
Yes. The next one is the mediator outcome effect. The average difference, so mediator and outcome, in the outcome across different levels of mediators. So the effect of diastolic blood pressure on the cardiovascular events.
That will be that HR 1.9 high blood pressure.
2 slides later, I'll show the numbers. The next one is natural indirect effect. The natural indirect is basically the average difference in the outcome caused by the average effect of the intervention on the mediator. So all this dotted line. So the effect of the intensive therapy versus standard therapy on the cardiovascular events that is mediated through the change in the diastolic blood pressure. Next one is the natural direct effect. The average difference in the outcome caused by the intervention while the mediator is held at a natural level when it is in the control or intervention. So we are keeping the moderator constant and in this. So the effect of intensive therapy versus standard therapy on cardiovascular events when the diastolic pressure is held at its natural value, defined as the value to take under the standard of intensity. The next is control direct effect. The average difference in the outcome caused by the intervention while the mediator is held at the constant level across the entire study. So this is these are the few terms that we need to know while looking at the analysis. So there's a lot of assumptions in this mediation analysis, particularly because they're all part of other studies. So, and it is important that we see how much of these assumptions are true, how close is it to the truth. So first assumption is temporal sequence of interventions, mediators and outcomes, which I had said. So in the context of RCTs, the mediator outcome are measured after assignment to the interventions. The requirement is for the mediator to be measured before the outcome in the sequence that I had said. But sometimes it may be very clear that the mediator precedes the outcome even without temporal sequence. Like the outcome is death, you know the mediator is before death, even if you want to measure it at a later date. Next, second assumption is exchangeability. So there's no unmeasured confounding. So in this, what happens is that we know that in the randomized control trials, we are assuming that all known and unknown confounders are balanced by virtue of being randomization. However, there's a flaw in the fact that this randomization may not really apply to the mediation analysis, which is looking at the mediator to the outcome part of the analysis. Because over time, there may be change in the confounding factors. And there's no real way where we can estimate this change during the course. So we are assuming that there are no unmeasured confounders just by the fact that it is an RCT. So RCTs assume that the intervention mediator and intervention outcome effects are unconfounded because of the randomization. However, random allocation intervention does not prevent confounding of the mediator and the outcome effect. So careful selection, measurement, and adjustment for that outcome is essential. So this is the second assumption. So for this, we will do sensitivity analysis in the way I'll show how it is done. So now there are 4 types of confounding, and we are assuming that these 4 types of confounding do not occur in a mediation analysis. The first one X is intervention and mediator. The second one is intervention and outcome. The third one is mediator and outcome. So this will be taken care of by randomization. But this is the one that's a problem. So this will not be taken care of by randomization. And then there's L, which confounds, or which is a confounder for all these 3 variables, which also will not be taken care of by randomization. The next assumption is consistency. So the intervention and mediators are to be well defined. Non-zero probability for any participant to enter the intervention or control groups and exhibit any level of mediator. So what does non-zero probability mean? Let's say we have 20 students here and 5 of them are bright students and 15 are not so bright students. So we say that the probability of picking a bright student is one, I mean, not the bright student, is 1 in 15. So we have already eliminated. So every student will have one number. So all the outcomes will have to be into one of them. So the participants will have to one of the groups. But if I were to say the probability of picking a non-bright student in the class, if we were to include the whole group, may be different. In this 15, it's a non-zero probability, but in the entire class, 5 of them will have a 0 probability. So this is extended. So this is just to show that you can have multiple mediators and not just one. The next one is how do you estimate? It's a little bit of statistics. So they assume there are two models. One is, if you can remember the temporality. So there is intervention, mediator, and the outcome. So in this, you can, when you're putting the numbers for the intervention, your mediator can be so that will be the independent variable. Your intervention is always independent variable. In one group, it is assumed that the mediator is the dependent variable. In another way, it's assumed that the outcome is the dependent variable. So if you have to go by 1, 2, 3. So in 1, the 2 will be the dependent variable, in 3, and then 3 will be the dependent variable. So here it treats the mediator as a dependent variable and another one outcome. So these parameters are used for prediction. So next is, so I will use this one to see how it goes. So first assumption, like I said, reduction in systolic blood pressure reduces the cardiovascular events. Yeah, so if you just look at these lines. So now we're looking at the association between the diastolic and the cardiovascular events. Here, this is the line that I'm looking at. So here, if you can see, the first one is this. So if you were to do an intensive reduction in BP, the odds of diastolic, so there is 3 times odds and diastolic BP will fall. And if you look at diastolic and cardiovascular events, the hazard ratio is 1.90 to 1.46 to 2.47. So now you've done a mediation analysis to estimate the effect of randomization on cardiovascular events through its effect on diastolic BP after adjusting for the confounders. So now the intensive therapy-induced reduction BP did not increase the cardiovascular risk. So you are supposed to look at this. The indirect effect is 1.04, but the hazard ratio is on either side, which is why it is not significant. So the low BP itself is associated with an increase. So when we've seen that the low BP itself is associated with increase in mortality, as seen by this 1.9. The increases cannot be added, but if you look at the indirect effect, it is not significant. So the increased risk cannot be attributed to the unintended effect of intensive antihypertensive therapies. So although the diastolic BP, drop in the diastolic BP has caused your cardiovascular events to go up, that itself will not explain your increase in the mortality, as evidenced by this indirect effect. Any questions? This is the first part. Okay, so mediation analysis can extend the utility of RCTs to investigate the mechanisms by which interventions cause outcome. We can apply it to multiple study designs like failure time outcomes, clustered RCTs. So if anybody is interested to do this, and these are the softwares that they will use to do this. The next part is a need for reporting guidelines. So I've just taken a screenshot of, I thought it was new, but the guidelines are coming 2016, so it's been there for a while. So it's just to show the number of trials that have used mediation analysis as given. So publications of mediation analysis increasing, but the quality of the reporting is suboptimal. So in the background is the AGReMa tool, a guide for reporting mediation analysis, AGReMa, for international consensus-based guidelines. So improved reporting means increased reproducibility. So this is just, we use the equator format. So equator format is enhancing quality and transparency of health research. So that's the same methodology for all the checklists and guidelines that we use. So they've just taken some 3 rounds of Delphi meetings and consensus meeting, provisional one. Then they had like a meeting and then they finally came up with this questionnaire with 25 items. So they had some review meeting and then Delphi survey consensus meeting. And then after meeting, everybody decided on this 25 checklists. Yeah. So that is how they come to this AGReMa checklist. So now I will show one more randomized control trial. And the mediation analysis that I will later appraise is a part of this RCT. So this is effectiveness of a digital intervention versus alcohol information for online help seekers in Sweden, an RCT. So just the key points of this. Population was online health seeker in Sweden. They were interested in reducing their alcohol consumption. The intervention was a digital intervention. So they would get every Sunday, they will get one message. And then that will tell them what to do and how to do. And they will also be given multiple modules. And at the end of the, I'll tell you the outcome duration, they will all have to give feedback. And they will tell them what else to do. The control is a standard alcohol information online. The outcome, the primary outcome is total weekly alcohol consumption. And the second primary outcome is frequency of daily episodic drinking. Secondary is classification as a risky drinker according to Swedish guidelines. The time period was still 4 months. It was done in Sweden. So it was a 2-arm parallel group RCT with simple randomization. There was no blocks, there was no stratification. Randomization and concealment was fully computer based. Research personnel were blinded, but participants were not blind. So we have to bear in mind. So sample size, they had used the Monte Carlo simulation based on prior study. They had assumed that the intervention group would be drinking 15% less alcohol than the control group at the end of 4 months. They had expected for power of 80% and significant level of 5%. Based on the previous studies, an attrition rate between 5 to 25. Keep this also in mind. It was not blinded, and the expected attrition rate was 5 to 25. So after all this, they had decided, the expected sample size is 2126. So it's an interesting study that they have 3 sub-studies that they had already planned for. The one part of the sub-study see how well a consent form can be. They have 2 kinds of consent forms, and they have to decide which of these 2 consent forms increase the recruitment of patients. So that is one study. After that, they mixed both of them together at the end of it, baseline, and they had randomized 2-1-2-9 because some of them did not complete the inclusion criteria. So of these, 1063 were allocated to the intervention, and the control group had 1066. Our interest is this. Our interest actually begins only from this. The other interesting thing in the trial, in the control, again, they split them into 2 groups. The control, it was a standard alcohol, what to do about alcohol. It's not intense like this. But one group, they had given something like what an alcohol, manufacturers will give, and something like evidence-based information sheet. So that we do not need that at this point. So anyway, so the mediators were first estimated at 1 month, 2 months, and 4 months, and the outcomes were at 2 months and 4 months. So from here is our study of interest. So the baseline, so the same baseline will also hold good for our mediation analysis. I did not think there were any significant differences. I just thought I should highlight that there were more women in both the groups, 58% women and 42% men. And the people who wanted to quit are the ones who are living with somebody with kids. But there is no difference between both the groups. These are the results. Basically, it is median and interquartile rate, and mean and standard deviation. So let's just look at the mean alone. So the mean at the end of 2 months, the mean was 9.4 in the intervention group and 10.5 in the control group. Okay, and so essentially what they have done is, so they have done an adjusted regression estimate. So from what I understand of how this whole thing is done, I will probably use one blood pressure example to better understand how they have come up with these numbers. Let's say there's a drop in BP. So by an intervention, your blood pressure drops by 10. So your effect estimate is about 10. But this may not be the same across a lot of groups. To make this value comparable across multiple study groups, you divide it by the standard deviation and then you will get the effect estimate after also accounting for the confounders. So if you can look, there's a difference between the two. The probability effect is basically there's a 90. So the estimate is 89. So which means that there is a 89%. They're likely to be 89% less. And the probability of this being true is 98.2%. So this is for the 4-monthly follow-up. So this is the first part of it, and we will use this. So for the case scenario, you're like 10%. 11%. Sorry. 11%, and the probability of this being true is 98.2%.
That is, just keep that. That is a Bayesian difference. They use Bayesian principle. So the difference is 0.89 or 11% less. So when you say a confidence interval 0.81 to 0.99, that is Bayesian credibility interval. Bayesian because it gives you the probability of that 0.89 being the most likely value is 98%. So if somebody gives you a probability value in a confidence interval, that means it's Bayesian. That means they had a prior value, then they came to a new value. That's not which beyond today's talk, but when you see that probability in a confidence interval, just assume you must remember that's most likely they use Bayesian methodology. So no, that is called prior value.
15%.
The prior value is the what you assume before the study. The study gives you a value of this difference between 7 and 8, and then you compute a posterior value that is 0.8. This is the posterior probability. Most likely value is 0.89, and that is 98% probability. That is the most likely. Yes, yes. This is basic methodology for getting that. Yes. No. If the this confidence interval doesn't cross, this difference doesn't cross over.
So now you're looking at newspaper and then you see that 50% alcoholics in Tamil Nadu drink every day. Finds a survey, and the chief minister of Tamil Nadu is like worried. And you are part of a team that has been appointed to come up with a feasible program in terms of finances and manpower. You're also expected to justify the ways through which the said intervention works. So how would you go about doing that? So the last part is the critical appraisal of the mediation analysis using the AGReMa tool. So when to use the AGReMa tool? Do you use it for all mediation analysis? And I did not mention in the Delphi, after the end of the Delphi consensus, the AGReMa tool had like a short form and a long form. So are you reporting a study that used mediation analysis? If it's no, then use both the equator and figure out. Was mediation analysis used as a primary analysis or secondary analysis of an observation study of AGReMa? If it is primarily used AGReMa, but ours is actually secondary. Already secondary, the mediation analysis we reported as a separate paper with primary focus on the mediation, which is where our paper is, or in the principal findings of main study. So because it is separate paper, I chose the full AGReMa tool. If it's a single paper and a secondary one, and then you will use a short form. So I have used a long AGReMa checklist. So this is advancing the reporting of mechanisms in implementation science, the guidelines for reporting. This is the paper I will use. Mediators of effects of a digital alcohol intervention for online health seekers, findings from the effectiveness trial that we had already looked at. The first part is title and abstract. Item 1, identify the study uses mediation analysis. So if you can, I put it in yellow. In the title itself, it mentions that mediators of effects are used. The second one is provide a structured summary of your objectives, method, results, and conclusions. I did not elaborate much on this. I just highlighted these few things. Next thing is introduction, which is item 3 and 4. Item 3 is describe the study background and theoretical rationale for investigating the source action. Include supporting evidence of theoretical rationale. Include supporting evidence as to why the mediator might have a causal effect. Essentially, you're telling them why you're doing this study. So this investigated the mechanisms by which we had figured out that the digital alcohol intervention reduces the alcohol consumption. But how did it do that? So it was meant to investigate the mechanisms. It was designed to influence 3 factors proposed as necessary for producing behavior change. Little bit of psychiatry here. So increasing intention, addressing environmental constraints, and enhancing necessary skills. They were all thought to help with reduction in alcohol consumption. They were common to social cognitive theories of behavior, which people employ in their one-on-one interviews when they help with de-addiction. So it was aimed to promote actions such as behavior substitution, problem solving, goal setting. So at the end of this thinking, it was designed to influence 3 mediators of change, which is our prime concern: the importance, know-how, and confidence. Importance is essentially how much does a person think that reducing alcohol is important for them on a scale of 1 to 10. Know-how is how aware is the patient on how to reduce alcohol consumption. Is he aware of methods to cut down alcohol? Confidence is how confident is he that he'll be able to do it. So these are, our rest of it goes around these 3 variables. Next thing is objectives. State the objectives of the study specific to the mechanism of interest, and objectives specify whether the study aims to test or estimate. So basically looking whether the mediator is there or not. The second one is how much is it helping. So it was nested within a larger trial that primarily aimed to estimate the total effect of intervention, which we looked at. But this one focused specifically on understanding mechanisms by which the intervention led. So it was aimed at estimating these mechanistic effects rather than simply testing for their presence. So the primary outcome is to estimate the degree to which importance, knowledge, and know-how and confidence, which were looked at, mediated the causal relationship between the digital alcohol intervention and alcohol consumption. The specific objectives are, again, like I said, the natural, direct, and indirect will come back to us now. The natural direct effect of treatment allocation on alcohol consumption outcomes at 2 and 4 months. The expected change in alcohol consumption when moving from the control to intervention while keeping the mediator factors constant. The natural indirect is when you're through the mediator. The expected change in alcohol consumption when staying in the control group, but changing the mediator factors to the values that they would have taken. The natural indirect of treatment allocation to mediator factors in 2 months and 12 months. So methods, study registration, it was registered in the database. Spirit study protocol, it is basically a protocol that gives you a guidelines on how, it's a checklist that gives you a guidelines on how to write protocols. It explicitly mentioned that there was no deviation from the protocol. Study design. So here it says, specify the design of the original study that was used in mediation analysis, where the details can be accessed, supported by a reference. If applicable, describe study design features. So it was nested within a 2-arm parallel group RCT. The key features, we know that it was a randomized trial. Blinding, with regards to the blinding, the participants were not blinded. The interventions we know, the control we know, the outcomes also we know. The mediators also we know. Follow-up also we know, 2 and 4 months. So what is a causal framework? So it is a counterfactual framework. Essentially what it means is, if what would have happened to the individuals if the mediators did not exist. So it's a counterfactual framework to estimate the natural, direct, and indirect effects of the intervention. So I want to talk about 2 things, temporality and lagging. Temporality we had already discussed. One thing is your mediator should always receive the outcome. Lagging is, if you remember the consort diagram of the primary trial, the mediators were estimated at 1 month, 2 months, and 4 months, but the outcome was only assessed at 2 months and 4 months. So that is lagging. I will tell you why it is important. The next thing is we had assumed that there was no confounders. This is the basic thing behind an RCT. Participant describe the target population, eligibility criteria specific to the mediation analysis, study location, study dates. It's actually not different from the primary one. So general population Swedish adults recruited using web search engine. The inclusion criteria were at least 13 years of age, having access to a mobile phone, having unhealthy alcohol use, which is drinking 9 or 14 or more standard drinks of alcohol per week, or 1 episode of heavy drinking. A standard drink is 12 grams. So there was no specific eligibility criteria for the mediation analysis. Recruitment was from 2019 to 2020. Follow-up data collection occurred at 1, 2, and 4 months. Sample size, I told you that state whether the sample size calculation was conducted. So there was no specific sample size for this, just the primary trial was taken. The original study arrived at 2126, but we had 2129. So what are the effects of interest? One is the natural direct and natural indirect effects of a digital alcohol intervention. And it was estimated following the definition of Pearl calculation. This is basically a statistical technique to estimate the outcomes. So a part of this is not the original one, I just made some changes to the original picture. So assume causal model, if you remember the sprint trial. So this is something, I tried to make something like that. So including graphical representation of the assumed causal model, including the exposure media. So all the entire trial is technically here. So your treatment, so weekly messages versus online health intervention, one of the two. Your mediators were importance, if they know how important it was, know-how and confidence were your mediators. And the assumed confounders were age, sex, household characteristics, alcohol consumption. These were the confounders actually. And the outcome of weekly consumption, alcohol consumption, and frequency of every episode. These are the primary outcomes. So this is the overall study design. They have also adjusted for these mediators also actually in the base. So this is why the mediators, these are the confounders. So causal assumptions. I said like we assume a lot of things in this. No unmeasured confounding at baseline, which we had discussed. Randomization and lag measures. Mediator to outcome confounding, like I said, this randomization will not ensure that mediator to outcome confounders can be eliminated. Next thing is they have single item measures. So for the outcome, they ask us to mark them on 1 to 10. So the best way for a construct is actually a multiple questionnaire. Questionnaire with multiple questions will give you the best validity construct. But they thought that may be too cumbersome and they decided on something like a Likert scale on 1 to 10. So the next assumption that they made is that missing data at random. So I'll show you so they had a lot of missing data. And the assumption was made that the missing data was at random based on a sensitivity analysis. So they had done one primary analysis with just the patients they had the information for. And they had imputed missing data and they had done an analysis and they figured out that there was more difference. And they come to this assumption that the missing data was at random. So just a small thing of missing data. So there are 3 kinds of missing data. One thing is missing data completely at random. So they're equally placed between both the groups. Missing not at random and missing at random. So one is missing completely at random, so that's not really effective. The second one is missing at random, and third one is missing not at random. So if you say it is not at random, that's like a red flag. So let's say that there's not missing data in the outcome here. The fellows are like drinking more. If they are missing, then it's like missing not at random. If completely at random is acceptable across all groups. The second one, which I thought difficult, was missing at random, which means that the younger people may be lost. That may really not affect your outcome. So missing completely at random, not at random. So we're assuming that it was at random. Measurements clearly describe interventions or exposures, mediators, outcome confounders, specify how and when they were measured. So the intervention group were given immediate access to digital alcohol intervention 4 months. The interview consisted of weekly self-assessment by text messages, web-based feedback, and invite for change. They did not test for moderators of the intervention's effect on the mediation. So they completely eliminated these moderators. The control group, what they did was, they also got a message, but the message was only a hyperlink to a common information sheet. So they were provided a link to the national website with alcohol and health information. And they were also, so at the end of 4 months, the control group also will be given the intervention. So they were also informed that they would receive additional support after 4 months. Apparently it was not, they did not know why they would do it. So next thing is measurement levels. It was done at individual levels. It can also be done at a cluster level also. Statistical methods. So they had used analytical strategies to reduce confounding. I had already discussed this counterfactual framework. Regression models were used for adjusting for potential confounders. Causal models were constructed to estimate the mediators. They had used binomial regression for counting data. Linear regression they had used. They had conducted attrition analysis, which we will look. Again, difference between attrition and missing. So attrition is not the same as missing data. So attrition is when patients are lost to follow-up or they do not report certain things. But missing data is a lab value may not be put in. So attrition is one of the causes of missing data. It was assumed that the data was missing at random, and that also was imputed. Sensitivity analysis was conducted using multiple imputation. So these are the softwares and the sub versions that they're used. Sensitivity analysis important. So they had to, because they had a lot of attrition in the study. If you remember, I had told you initially that the attrition that they had assumed was 15 to 25%, but you'll be like surprised to see how much attrition was there. So they had done the sensitivity analysis for causal assumption. I had discussed lab design, sensitivity analysis for missing data because they had significant attrition. So for the mediator analysis, at the end of 1 month, they had made 80% responders. For the second month, they had 53%, and fourth month, they had 50%. So much higher than what they had expected. So they had available data analysis and they had imputed it. So on imputation, they found that the older participants, those with fewer episodes of heavy drinking and those with higher baseline were more likely to respond to the follow-up. The total effects were compared. So imputation is basically a technique where you are trying to handle missing data. So, if you don't have full data, you can do one of the two things. One thing is you completely eliminate them from analysis. That means your denominator will completely change. But the second thing that you can do is you can, with the information that is available, you can generate a model that tells you what expected value is going to be and use that here. So the key after imputation is to figure out that your report with all the values that you have should be the same as the one with your imputed data. They should not be significantly different. They got ethical approval and number and stuff. Next thing is results. So describe baseline characteristics of participants included in mediation analysis. Report the total sample size. We had already seen this from the original one. So they had 2,129 participants. At the end of 2-month follow-up, we have information for 73%. At the end of 4 months, we have it for 67%. The 80%, 53, and 50 are for the mediator analysis. But the 73 and 67 is for the outcome analysis. So outcomes and estimates, report point estimates and uncertainty estimates for the exposure mediator outcome. So this is on a scale of 1 to 10. If you can see, the intervention did not make any significant difference to the importance. People felt that the importance was same throughout. One thing is that, and it was also at 10. The scale was only 1 to 10. And to begin with, others felt that they knew it was important to cut down on alcohol. The second thing is, over the time, the green one is intervention and the red one is the group. Over time, there was a significant difference in the know-how. At the end of 4 months, if you think that at baseline, they were both less than 1 maybe. And at the end of 4 months, the intervention group had gone up to 8.5 and this maybe was 6.5. And they also had a little less different, but more in the know-how category than the confidence. So next thing is, this is the estimate of adjusted standard effects of treatment on mediator effect 1, 2, and 4. So like I said, these are the 3 variables that we were looking at. We'll just look at one of them. So here the effect of the estimate is 0.05. So it is the same principle that we had used. So you have an outcome, then you divide it by the standard deviation, and then you adjust it to the confounders, then you get the adjusted standardized effect. So these are the 3 steps that you do. And like so this is the Bayesian thinking. So you assume one at the beginning, then you marry it with the current knowledge set up, and then you come up with the posterior probability. So the effect. So again, if you were to translate it to things that we are familiar with, a hazard ratio of more than 1 is, hazard ratio less than 1 is protective. So the same thing you have to use it. So here, if you can see, the estimate is 0.05, but on either side is 0, and the chance of it being it is 86.1%. I put this red not because it's a significant gesture that you can see. But if you can see the other 2 ones, the effect estimate is 0.41, lying between 0.32 and 4.9. So basically, it's more than 99% chance that the effect estimate is 0.41. This is what it means. This is at 1 month, and 2 months it is 0.58, and in 4 months it is 0.7. So this is the this is the natural, direct, and natural effects of treatment. So this is the second outcome. So here we had looked at how the intervention has performed on importance, know-how, and confidence. And this is the IRR, which is the incident risk ratio. So IRR is basically incidence in the exposed by incidence in the unexposed. If the IRR is more than 1, it means that the risk of alcohol consumption is higher in those with the intervention. You would want the IRR to be less than 1. The same like hazard ratio sort of thing. So if you, I just wanted so this is a full model, which means that they have taken all 3 mediators, and then they have split it into importance, know-how, and confidence. So here, if you can see, at the end of 1 month, the natural indirect. So when I say indirect, it means through the mediators, there was more than 99% probability of the IRR being 0.93, and both of them being less than 1. But the natural direct effect was only 50. I mean, the probability of it was just at 1, and there's a 51% probability. But if you can see at the end of 4 months, this is at 2 months, which means 1 month for the mediator. But if you can see at the end of 4 months, the natural direct effect seems to have increased. So there's a 99.9% probability of it being 0.79, which was not there in the 2 months one. So this is where the randomized, so we did not really confound for the factors between the mediator and the outcome. So the mediator and the outcome started to act after the 2 months, and which is why the effect had actually changed. The rest of the things are, so if you have to look at, so this is one thing that I wanted to highlight. So there are confounding factors, and it is, and here it is, which is completely explained by this. The second one is know-how. Here at 1 month it was 0.94 and the probability was more than 99. So it was all the same. If you can look at, so over time you can see the direct effect seems to have changed significantly from at what it was at 2 months and what it was at 4 months. And it is not being completely explained by just the mediator. So there are other factors that is causing this. So this is for the total weekly and that is for the heavy alcohol episodic consumption. So sensitivity analysis. So handling of the missing data. So they had used multiple imitation using predictive mean matching. So essentially what they do is you have observed data, and using the data you generate a model. So now this model. So now let's say a variable x for an input x you get an output of y. So you will choose this y, which is from the model, and you will choose a value closest to this in the observed set, the ones from you have already the data, and you will use that to implement predictive mean matching. So assessment of causal assumption, we had already discussed causal models, attribution analysis, and comparison of the total effect. So the comparison of the total effect is essentially is, now we have the data for the effect of the intervention through the mediator on the outcome. And that is compared to what the result of the primary trial was. If the two of them are the same, then you know that it was robust. So this is just to show the sensitivity analysis with regards to the missing data. The green is intervention and the red is control. So basically they had looked at, so they had, because they had significant non-responders, they were seeing how close the non-responders, it essentially means that the non-responders and the responders were overlapping. So there was, even if you were to remove the non-responders, the results of your study would not have changed. Correct. This is just a numeric.
Right. So there are three things here. That is effect of age. The outcome is age. I mean, looking at the effect of age, and here episodic heavy drinking at baseline and confidence at baseline. So across all three, the missing values didn't seem to make a difference. So the sensitivity analysis work.
So this is the effect of this is a total effect like that. So this is the original estimate, and this is the original meaning from the primary analysis, and this is the mediation estimate, which is not very different, which means that it is a robust trial. Last part. So limitations, one thing is significant accretion. Measurement issues, meaning we had used a single item measure as opposed to a questionnaire. Ceiling of importance, meaning the importance when it started off itself, all of them felt it was very important. It was at 10. So there was no way to show if it could have improved. If they had 1 to 20, maybe it would have shown. Causal inference we looked at. Potential biases. One thing is social desirability bias. So the patients were not really blinded, so they knew what interventions they were going to get. So they may have reported what they felt was right and what is expected of them. Third thing is waiting list design bias. So there is the control group were told that you do this for now, and then for 4 months you will be told what exactly will help you better. So they may have been upset, and they also would have reported differently. There was no blinding. They did not include a power calculation. Interpretation. So interpret the estimate effects considering the study's magnitude, uncertainty we looked at. Only two things that we did not look at. One is plausibility and generalizability. We had also looked at the intervention. So plausibility is an explanation to the findings of the study. So the findings regarding the mediating role of know-how align with the importance of behavior change, which may explain why this is the strongest one. Generalizability, Swedish adults. I don't know if we are very different from the Swedish adults, but they had a lot of women, maybe a little different. The digital intervention was delivered through an app with the feedback. So I don't know how many of them can actually use it if we were to use it in an Indian setting. The intervention was actually restricted only 4 months. How would it reflect in a real life scenario is not known, non-research setting. So generalizability and plausibility. Implications on discuss the implications of overall results for clinical practice, policy, and science. For the clinical practice, importance will include content focused on know-how and confidence. You can use digital tools that do that. For the policy, this can be used at a large scale. For science, this can be used as developing digital interventions. Other information funding. So they have two sources: the Alcohol Research Council, a Swedish alcohol retailing monopoly, and Swedish Research Council. But they had no role in study design, data collection, data analysis, interpretation, writing, decision, nothing. Conflicts, they had 3 authors. This MB actually has a private company called the Alexid AB. So this maintains and distributes evidence-based lifestyle intervention, public and healthcare use. The company's services were used for sending text messages, but they mentioned that it had no role in doing anything with the trial, just that they had used their services. The other people did not have any competing interests. The data code was there in the supplementary materials. So at the end of this, what would you do? I would generate a digital app to reduce alcohol consumption that emphasizes know-how and confidence. And thanks. I have to acknowledge that I've taken some slides from my introductory slides are pure from there. Thanks.